we're going to talk about stupid, sexy Hasan Piker, who found himself detained by ICE yesterday as he was flying into Chicago. Well, not ICE. I'm sorry, that's a little hyperbolic. He was detained by Customs and Border Patrol, which is effectively the original version of ICE, when he flew into Chicago from France. This is notable for two reasons. One of them, Hassan is a natural born U.S. citizen. For those of you who are unfamiliar with him, he is the most prominent left wing voice online. He was born in the United States of America despite growing up in Turkey before moving back here to attend college. So, that in and of itself is a tremendous red flag. Not that I believe that, US citizens are absolved of being detained by Customs and Border Patrol, obviously, but the reason that they detained him is not because he's like a suspected drug mule or anything like that, is just because of his politics. As I mentioned, he is a very prominent left-wing voice. He is a very prominent critic of Donald Trump and a very prominent critic of Israel. He is not the first left wing figure to be detained by ICE. There was this young lady who does TikTok. I believe her username is Eyes on Sav or something like that. I apologize if I'm misrepresenting it, but she was also detained by Customs and Border Patrol in the past and had a very nightmarish experience. Hassan said that this wasn't, too ridiculous of an encounter, but more of just like an inconvenience for him, and I believe he got lucky in that regard. But we're going to first start off with coverage from Taylor Lorenz's Substack User Mag. Hasan Piker detained at the border and questions for hours over his politics. Hasan Piker, the biggest progressive streamer in the United States, was detained by Customs and Border Patrol for hours of questioning upon returning to the U.S. from a trip to France this weekend. Piker posted about the incident on X and later talked about it on his stream. He was detained in Chicago and questioned for 2 hours about protected journalistic activities, like who he's interviewed and his political beliefs. He was asked whether or not he'd interviewed Hamas, the Houthis, or Hezbollah members. He was questioned about his opinion on Trump and Israel and asked about his history of bans on Twitch. His phone and laptop were not confiscated. The young lady who I talked about previously, she got this same treatment, but also the agents poured through her phone. They poured through all of her electronics. They perused all of her social media accounts, all because she was an out and about critic of Donald Trump. Now, the big, I can't even say controversy, quote unquote controversy, an entirely manufactured controversy by right wing media, has been painting Hassan and really anyone who is sympathetic towards Palestinians or the Houthis or whatever as terrorist sympathizers, which is not true. People like Hassan, people like Amy Goodman, people like Kyle Kalinske, people like myself, just because we cover these events in a fair manner and actively highlight the oppression that these people face, do not mean that we are materially supporting Hamas, the Houthis, or any other armed group. That is simply not the case. That is a conflation that is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous. It's very ignorant not to actually analyze current events under the microscope on which they are happening. Hassan very prominently interviewed a 19-year-old Yemeni teenager who, again, right-wingers labeled as a terrorist, and they condemned Hassan for lending this kid a platform. Of course, he is not a terrorist. He is just a resistance fighter fighting against the imperialist actions of the United States and Israel. That is a legitimate journalistic practice. You can interview the quote-unquote opposition. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, and allowing these people to explain to you their worldview, especially if it's someone from a group that is relatively unknown, and a group like the Houthis or like Hamas, who the world, or at least the Western world, only sees through the eyes of media that is aligned with Israel. At no point has Hasan sent arms to any of these groups. He hasn't sent money to any of these groups. He is merely doing his job as a political commentator and explaining and analyzing the events that are unfolding in real time to his audience. Quote, they straight up tried to get something out of me that I think they could use to basically detain me permanently, Piker said on stream following the incident. The agent kept saying stuff like, do you like Hamas? Do you support Hamas? Do you think Hamas is a terror group or a resistance group? I kept repeating the same statement over and over again. I kept saying, I'm on the side of the civilians. I want the bloodshed to end. I am a pacifist. I want wars to end, which is insane because up until this moment, if you were to say as an American citizen, you stand 10 toes down with Hamas or you stand 10 toes down with the Houthis, they can't deny you entry into the country for that shit. DHS flagging and detaining one of the largest left-wing voices for their political opinions while the Trump administration suggests they might suspend habeas corpus does not portend well for the future, said lawyer and content creator Alex Peter. Hasan mentions more in depth on his stream, and clips of that you can see from the VOD or also on YouTube. He did say that the agents were not combative and they were kind of just asking redundant questions over and over again, which seems like, par for the course, especially considering the time that we're in. Again, it is almost a crime to criticize Israel. It is a crime to criticize the Israeli government for the very out and about genocide that they are doing. Keep in mind, to use the word genocide is to use the same verbiage as various human rights groups. It is to use the same verbiage as Amnesty International when you proclaim Israel as an apartheid state. It is to base this verbiage off of actions that have been condemned only recently by several large Western media entities. Israel has killed anywhere from like 48,000 to 250,000 Palestinians directly or indirectly. A large majority of these folks are women, children, and innocent civilians. Israel has blockaded and prevented aid from entering Gaza for the last 2 months. There are hundreds of thousands of people on the brink of starvation. There have been dozens of children that have already died from starvation because of Israel's actions. Israel has leveled anywhere from 60 to 70, perhaps even 80% of Gaza entirely. They have no electrical infrastructure. They have no water infrastructure. There is no way for aid to even make it into the fucking country. And even when aid does make it into the fucking country, Israel goes and kills the UN workers or the World Health Kitchen workers that are supplying this aid. Piker's detention occurs against a backdrop of increasing scrutiny of political activists and commentators, especially those who challenge the administration's policies on Israel. This type of targeting creates an undeniable chilling effect. Already, activists who are critical of the government are nervous to leave the country, given the crackdowns happening on speech and the increased security at the border. Detaining U.S. citizens over speech, especially a political commentator and journalist, allows border control to become a tool of political intimidation. I stumbled upon a video a couple weeks ago of David Pakman, of the David Pakman Show. David Pakman is a liberal commentator. He is not as far left-wing as Hasan Piker. He is critical of the Trump administration, certainly, but I don't think that the Trump administration would view him as much of a threat as Hasan Piker. However, David Pakman released a video in which he explained how he had been advised not to leave the country for reasons like this. Now, pardon me, I don't recall the specifics of Pakman's citizenship status. I believe he is a naturalized U.S. citizen. I don't recall where his family immigrated from, but that's irrelevant. It is still incredibly frightening that they are operating in this manner. Now, one thing we cannot overlook is Hasan Piker having a Islamic name. That certainly plays into CBP and their detainment of him regardless. But still, they're trying to set the precedent. Like, I can't say for certain that someone like me with, a white Anglo-Saxon ass name would or would not be detained by Customs and Border Patrol. It's definitely possible, especially if they are now cracking down on people critical of the Trump administration, which again is an exceptionally frightening precedent that they are trying to set. It is a blatant violation of free speech. The reason they're doing this is to try to create an environment of fear, to try to get people like myself or others who would be in my shoes that don't have the same level of security to shut the fuck up. Piker said on a stream recounting the details of the incident, "Nothing I have done online is illegal as of now. Laws may change in the future, and they might actually start prosecuting speech, which I do fear is the goal of the administration. But so far, everything I've done is protected under the First Amendment, and none of the questions I was asked by CBP are actually valid to ask. I think they detained me because they know who the fuck I am, and they wanted to put the fear of God into me, not knowing that I'm a stubborn piece of shit, and that's not going to work at all." I'm sure that the government has a file on Hasan. I think that the federal government has files on a lot of prominent individuals, regardless of their political leanings, regardless of, their job. Whether it's, I'm sure the government definitely has a file on Alex Jones and Tucker Carlson, considering that they are directly descended from people within the intelligence agencies. But I do think that the federal government keeps their eyes on prominent individuals. But he is absolutely correct. There's no reason for Customs and Border Patrol to pull him off to the side at security without a valid reason. Thinking that Hasan supports Hamas is not a valid reason to detain him unless you have evidence that he is materially benefiting Hamas, whether again that be by sending arms, intelligence, money, whatever. Hasan, as big of a creator as he is, does not have that kind of motion, right? He's not a fucking sovereign country. He does not have the resources to do anything tangible to these perceived terrorist groups. That's another thing that plays into this. Though the terrorism designation is very arbitrary. It's very loosey-goosey. The government picks and chooses who they want to label as terrorists. They may or may not think Cuba is a terrorist state. They may or may not think that the Ku Klux Klan is a terrorist organization. They may or may not think Hamas is a terrorist organization. But it's the arbitrary nature of that designation that leaves it open to criticism. Because how can you define Hamas as a terrorist organization when Israel has done 10 to 100 times more terrorism than Hamas? That does not make any sense. Hamas is merely an armed resistance group fighting against the colonial power that is Israel. In this situation, Israel is the terrorist actor with their blatant disregard for war crimes, for international law, for civilians. The article continues, in a functioning democracy, public figures and journalists are supposed to be able to criticize the government without fear of retaliation. The criticism is valid in holding power to account. When authorities start treating political beliefs like security threats, it sends a loud, chilling message to anyone expressing themselves online, especially those with a platform that they might be targeted. There has never been truly free speech in America, whether that be McCarthyism, being a communist, a socialist back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, whether that be outspoken against the Vietnam War, whether that be outspoken against the war in Iraq. Not that people were necessarily prosecuted for this, well, they were during the McCarthy era, but there were consequences levied upon these protesters that they were not deserving of. McCarthyism is wrong. Targeting people who criticized the Iraq War is wrong. Targeting people who criticized the Vietnam War was wrong. Those instances, the Vietnam War and the Iraq War, are blatant, or they are blatantly unjustifiable, objectively unjustifiable conflicts that anybody with a moral compass would protest against. McCarthyism, nobody should be prosecuted based on their political beliefs. The only time anybody should be prosecuted is if they are doing something illegal. I hate Nazis, but unless these Nazis are going out and lynching and assaulting people, I don't think that they should be prosecuted on the grounds of their political ideology. And I believe that because one administration may target Nazis, a second administration may target socialists and anarchists and communists. It's too much of a slippery slope. We have a follow-up article here from The Guardian, and I'm including this just so we can hear a little bit about, or a little bit from, the Department of Homeland Security, because they released a statement that was not in Taylor Lorenz's article, and I believe it wasn't in her piece because they didn't release a statement at the time. Quote, "This is nothing but lying for likes," said Tricia McLaughlin, a spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security, in a statement. Quote, "Claims that his political beliefs triggered the inspection are baseless. Our officers are following the law, not agendas." Quote, "Upon entering the country, this individual was referred for further inspection, a routine lawful process that occurs daily and can apply for any traveler. Once his inspection was complete, he was promptly released." Now, I ask Tricia McLaughlin, what is the law that they were following? What are the grounds on which Hasan Piker was detained? Where is the evidence that this person is doing anything illegal? They have none. And all of the questions that he was asked centered around his criticism of the genocide in Gaza and all of the other illegal bombings of various Middle Eastern countries. How this is justified? It doesn't make any sense. It is a really, really shameless and loose defense. It is very clearly, this is very clearly politically motivated. A CBP official called the suggestion that Piker was targeted for his political views baseless. Piker repeatedly described the exchange as quote-unquote cordial, but said he was transparent with the officer interviewing him that he planned to speak out about his experience, which the streamer felt anything but random and routine. Assuming the officer was familiar with his online commentary, Piker said he was candid about his views, telling the agent he was not fond of the U.S. president, which, again, very common take to have. Being unfond of a sitting U.S. president is something that half the population deals with. But would CBP have been detaining people who didn't like Joe Biden? I mean, they would have detained Hasan if that were the case anyway. But this is such a dangerous precedent to set. Chip Gibbons, the policy director of Defending Rights and Dissent, said in a statement, quote, "We are deeply disturbed that CBP is stopping political commentators at the border to interrogate them about First Amendment protected activities. Such an abuse of power is an affront to press freedom." Free speech enjoyers are not coming to the defense of Hasan in this instance. And it's because the free speech enjoyers only enjoy free speech when it is their side doing the speech.